Gentlemen, let this event begin. My name is Leif Stenberg. I'm the director of the Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations, AKU ISMC. I have the pleasure and privilege to introduce a new academic procedure at AKU ISMC. This evening we are going to inaugurate a new professor. This has happened once earlier in the history of the Institute, but this will be the first time we organize an inaugural lecture. Consequently, I also have the honor and pleasure of welcoming you all to a celebration of Dr. Stephane Pradines' promotion to the position of professor at Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations. The format will be as follows. As you may hear, I'm doing an introduction, and as soon as I'm finished, Professor Pradines will give a talk entitled Muslim Architecture and History, the Role of Archaeology. After what I am sure will be an excellent, informative and enjoyable presentation, we have invited Professor Aga Khan University from SOAS to give comments and discuss the work of Professor Pradines. Following that part, if we have time, we open the floor for questions and comments, but it's also dependent on your thirst. Stephane Pradines received his PhD in Islamic archaeology from Sorbonne University in 2001. And if there is one single word that can describe Stephane Pradines, it is the word archaeologist. Not in a vaguely defined post-colonial or Foucauldian aspect open for various associations or interpretations. No, Stephane Pradines is an archaeologist. This is not a statement on my behalf coming out of thin air. There are plenty of empirical evidence for this, and I imagine that most of Stephane's colleagues can bear witness to this. But personally, I asked him about his choice of career. Why become an archaeologist? I'm only to give a glimpse of his very long answer. And I ask you all to shut your eyes and imagine the small boy in the south of France who was driving his parents mad, digging up things in the garden, pretending to be, yes, you guessed it, an archaeologist. Another empirical evidence is the photos. Stephane happily sends photos to the director of AKU ISMC from his excavations and the extreme hardships along the shores of the Maldives or the white beaches of Tanzania when he is either relaxing, smoking from the water pipe or swimming in the crystal clear water. The question is, why are we not all archaeologists? More seriously, I think the exhibition outside the lecture hall, curated by Stephane, is a very good example of the very interesting, valuable and significant work that archaeologists do today, and Stephane Pradines is certainly one among them. Please take a moment and visit during the reception afterwards. Stephane was a lecturer in Islamic archaeology at Cairo University from 2003 to 2005. In 2007, he founded the first field school in Islamic archaeology in Egypt, a partnership between Cairo University and Shams University and the Ministry of Egyptian Antiquities, with nearly 100 young trainees in 10 years. Dr. Pradines received 2 awards from Ain Shams University in Cairo in appreciation for his collaboration with the Archaeology Department, Faculty of Arts and Shams University. It commemorated 10 years of collaboration and creation of the first field school of Islamic archaeology in Egypt and the biggest field school of its kind for the MENA region. Notably, throughout his career, Dr. Pradines has organized a number of extracurricular activities for students and young scholars to encourage them in their studies, showing a commitment to build local capacity. The field school organized in Tanzania this summer is a good example of continuity on this aspect and also how Stephane contributes to build local competence and knowledge. Dr. Pradines joined the Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations in 2012. He is an active and engaged scholar and teacher at AKU ISMC. He successfully supervises students and mentors them in their work. In addition, he has mentored students and young scholars of other academic institutions in France, England and Egypt. I think it is fair to say that this quality at work, personality, sense of humor, a French version of perhaps, but it's the joke you must do, of Indiana Jones, Even if the battles he fight is not with the evil forces in the world, perhaps there is something going on with corrupt bureaucrats, but as a director of IKUISMC, I don't want to know about that part. I am more thinking about the harsh battles he is fighting against the burning sun and one or two mosquitoes in front of the campfire when dinner is served. In his research, Dr. Pradines has been directing or co-directing excavations in Europe, primarily France, the Middle East, foremost in Egypt, and East Africa, mainly in Tanzania and more recently in the Maldives. In his CV, Stephane describes the most important of the excavations. Here, I think it's enough to say that Stephane seems to have a good feeling for what is new in the field and where there is interesting empirical material to find. From his extensive list of publications, it is clear that his work in the field also has materialized in scholarly publications. These publications are held in high esteem by internationally recognized colleagues. In the letter supporting Stephane's promotion, one of the leading scholars in the field says, quote, "I would consider his Swahili Past in Peril, New Archaeology in East Africa, in the Journal of Oriental and African Studies, the most fascinating of his recent publications." Throughout the article, Pradines' extensive data reminds the reader that East Africa is part of the Islamic world, particularly the greater Indian Ocean world, and that trade links, even as far south as Madagascar, were extremely important in the 10th and the 12th centuries. Pradines' maturity as a scholar and his mastery of the East African field was displayed in his many debates within the article with more senior established scholars. This sort of exchange with others in one's field is rare, but bluntly necessary if our fields are to grow. End of quote. His work has also generated broader attention in that he is frequently invited to give talks, seminars, workshops and conferences at prestigious universities in the world. But as the quotation reminds us, he is also involved in scholarly debates about the field, and he drives the field forward, even if sometimes making one or two enemies. But what can a French professor do? He or she can certainly not be without enemies. What kind of French professor would that be? Again, more seriously, Stephane's international recognition also attracts students and young scholars to apply to AKUISMC, either to enroll as students in our MA program or to come here to do research with Dr. Pradines. There are many other examples of Professor Pradines' steps forward during the last years, such as the fact that an organization like UNESCO seeks Stephane's assistance to undertake work in the Maldives. And I think this is a testament to the quality of his work. Another example is Stephane's ability to get numerous grants for his excavations in both Egypt and Mali. I think that's a clear evidence of the rigor of his work. So also is his outreach activities in the form of not only lectures but also TV appearances. However, even if I'm proud in my capacity as a director of Stephane appearing on TV, I have to admit that I'm a little exhausted watching documentaries about another archaeological excavation. Finally, Dr. Stephane Pradines has contributed significantly and consistently to the projects, programs and development of AKUISMC. As I understand it, Stephane has in this process developed as a scholar and a teacher, but also as a valued colleague. And it is great to see former students in the audience today. The agreement I personally have with Stephane is that he is always welcome to my office, letting off steam, making suggestions about how we should organize the AKUISMC, or proposing new things we should do. I very much like, from a personal perspective, your straightforwardness, but I'm not always following your suggestions. Perhaps this should not be mentioned in public. And I don't know, but I'm thinking here of the interest of Professor Pradines, and that an interest of Professor Pradines, namely his affection for all kinds of dangerous weapons. All I have said, with some exceptions, as you may imagine, was the foundation for why I and more importantly, a number of highly qualified colleagues in the field of archaeology strongly recommended that Dr. Stephane Pradines to be promoted to the rank of full professor. So, the floor is yours, Professor Pradines.
Dear Leif, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. Before starting, I would like to thank all my colleagues who organized this event tonight, especially the colleagues from the ISMC and the Aga Khan Center, Saima, Kanika, Alex, Layal, Eddie, Anna, Eugene, Stephen, Wahab, all my colleagues present here and the one who are absent. I would like to thank Professor Aga Khan to be present for this very special day. It's a great pleasure to see also my wife, my colleagues, and my students in the room tonight. As Leif mentioned, after a PhD at the Sorbonne in 2001, I got a position at the French Institute. Yeah.
Click the on and off button on the side of the computer.
Sorry. Yeah, this one. It's not a technical problem. It's a new building, so. Just so after a PhD at the Sorbonne University in 2001, I got a position at the French Institute of Archaeology in Egypt, where I was scientific member from 2001 to 2012. And I joined the Aga Khan University, the Institute, the ISMC, in September 2012. And of course, I was very pleased to be appointed this year on the 23rd March, I remember precisely the day, the 23rd March 2018, Professor of Islamic Art and Architecture. During 1 hour, oh, what's happened? It's automatic maybe. Is it? No. During 1 hour, I will present you the result of my research in Cairo and in East Africa, especially in Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, Comoros, and the Maldives. So for those who know a little bit Egypt and Cairo, Cairo was very well known through historical documentation, and but we knew very little about the archaeology of what we call Islamic Cairo or Fatimid Cairo. And I don't know and in fact, we knew only about existing monuments. The monuments who are standing today, such as, for example, for Fatimid Cairo, the great Fatimid gates of Bab el-Futu, Bab el-Nas, and Bab Zuwayla, and some mosques, such as, for example, the Al-Azhar Mosque. And our knowledge about Fatimid Cairo or the city was, or archaeological knowledge was in fact limited to the old town of Cairo, that we call also Fustat, or from time to time Coptic Cairo. And this knowledge was limited to Fustat. And what we try to do for these past years is to extend our knowledge, archaeological knowledge, to the what we call Islamic Cairo, or precisely Fatimid Cairo. And I remember in 2001, my late professor, Marianne Barucan, told me, don't worry, I will send you to Cairo. Don't worry, you will do few test pits. It will last only few months, and then you can continue your research, on the Red Sea. And in fact, she was wrong, and she was very happy to be wrong, because I spent 16 years doing some excavations in Cairo. So the project in Cairo started, in fact, with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. You all know that the Aga Khan Trust for Culture did a big project, regeneration project, in Darb el Ahmar district, and also created this huge, beautiful panoramic park of the Al-Azhar Park. And during the process of building of the park, the Aga Khan Foundation cleared a large part of the Ayyubid wall, the wall built by Salah ad-Din. And the idea was, from the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, was to work with an Institute of Archaeology, so the FAO, the French Institute of Archaeology, to create some excavations, to do some excavations along the Ayyubid wall, the wall of Salah ad-Din. And so it's what we did in 2000, 2001. And in fact, a few years later, I extended the whole project not only to the Al-Azhar Park, but to the whole Fatimid and Ayyubid walls, around Cairo. So we did some excavations not only connected to the Al-Azhar Park, but we did also some excavations all along the whole Fatimid city. And I will describe these excavations right now. But I have to come back to the main site that we excavated for 9 years in Cairo, next to the Al-Azhar Park, very close to the Al-Azhar Mosque. The site of the archaeological triangle. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture called this site Archaeological Triangle. The French Institute called this site the Parking Darassa. Darassa, it's less poetic, I guess, but very practical. The archaeological triangle, in fact, during this excavation, so during nine years, we discovered several structures. For tonight's lecture, I will focus mainly on the Fatimid remains, mainly on the Fatimid fortifications. But we found a lot of archaeological remains, and just to mention the most important ones, we found during our excavation a Mamluk cemetery from the 14th, 15th century. We found a lot of Mamluk housing and streets from the 13th and 14th century. Of course, the Ayyubid wall was just standing in front of us, but we did the architectural study and also the excavation of the Ayyubid wall. And we were more surprised to find during our excavations another wall made not of limestone but made of mud brick, a Fatimid fortification from the end of the 11th century. And finally, the last level that we found were a Fatimid mausoleum built by the end of the 10th century, the very beginning of the Fatimid Cairo. So, in archaeology, we start by the end, basically. So it's quite logical. We start by the top with the most recent layers to reach, the oldest one, who are normally down. So I start with the first layers that we excavated, the Mamluk cemetery. You can see here some cemetery, you can see here some tombstones. And what is interesting in this Mamluk cemetery, two things. First point, this Mamluk cemetery corroborates a lot of archives and historical documents that we have about the Islamic Cairo. We know that Islamic Cairo, during the Mamluk period, a part of the city was abandoned because of plague epidemic and because we call also the Black Death. And what is very interesting here, we saw and we found during our excavation some Mamluk buildings destroyed and reused as a cemetery. You can see very clearly here the graves, through the stone floor. The second point of this cemetery is the fact that it was a very large cemetery. We excavated more than 100 graves. And this cemetery is a perfect picture of the description of the plague epidemic described by Ilyas or Al-Makrizi for the 14th and the 15th century. And we found what we call mass graves. So basically, in one pit, we found several bodies. It's not, of course, classic in Islam, but at least the bodies were turned, with the face in the direction of Mecca. And the last point, above these graves, we found some level, of burn and ashes, and most probably, most of these bodies were burned. So they were buried following the Islamic Muslim fashion, but they were burned. And these are clearly evidence of plague epidemic. Here you can see a map from the end of the 15th century, from Matteo Pagano, most probably a Venetian spy. And if you zoom in this map, you can see very clearly the eastern part of Cairo here with ruins, and tombs. You can read here maybe Turbe del Sultan Hamson. So it's very interesting because we have iconography, we have textual evidence, primary sources to describe, the ruins of Cairo. I think about, for example, the book published by my colleague Julien Loiseau, about this episode, the story of Cairo. Then we have some Mamluk levels, Mamluk housing, and we found also Mamluk houses, but also a Mamluk street. And there are evidence of the area described by Al-Makrizi as Bain el-Surayn, the area between the walls. And this place and these houses and these buildings are very interesting for us. Why? Because they prove that Makrizi was a very good observer. What he described was real. He saw these things by himself, but he was a very bad archaeologist. Why? Because he said that this area, Ben el-Surayn, was built between the walls, between the Ayyubid wall of Salah ad-Din and between the first Fatimid wall of Jawar al-Sikili. But during the excavation, we proved that in fact this wall that Makrizi have seen was not the wall of Jawar al-Sikili, but was the second Fatimid wall built by Badr al-Jamali. And even if you are not archaeologists, you can see here a quite clear evidence. We found some Fatimid remains prior to the Fatimid mud brick wall. You can see here a Fatimid tower from the time of Badr al-Jamali, made of mud brick, and you can see here very clearly the foundation of this tower are built over a small Fatimid mausoleum from the end of the 10th century. So you can see very different levels, and with these levels, they are associated to a particular period in the Fatimid history. And of course, this mausoleum was from the very beginning of the Fatimid city, so the end of the 10th century, probably early 11th century. And so we started excavations with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, but we were also supported by the French Institute of Education and Research, and I started to open new excavations on the other side of the Al-Azhar Street, on the Fatimid gate called Bab el-Tawfiq. This Fatimid gate is not very well known compared to Bab Zuela or Bab el-Futu and Bab el-Nas, but it was the main gate to the east of Cairo. And this Fatimid gate, you can see here on the picture, was very interesting to me. Why? Because I wanted to demonstrate that the datation, the date that we got from the Ayyubid, of the Fatimid wall, was correct. So we did some excavations, around this Fatimid gate made of limestone, made of stone. And what we found here you can see a Fatimid inscription built in situ, in the gate, a Fatimid inscription in Kufit from Badr al-Jamali, so from the end of the 11th century, precisely 1087, 1092. And so it was interesting for us to excavate this gate, because this gate was still standing, and during the excavation of this gate, we found again the Fatimid mud brick wall. And this Fatimid mud brick wall was connected to the stone gate, to the limestone gate. So it was very interesting because we demonstrate first that our datation was correct, they were correct, in Darasa, on the parking, and also we demonstrate something else, that Badr al-Jamali used different kind of materials to build this a stone wall or enclosure wall. He used limestone for the gates, for the monumental gate, and he used also mud brick for the walls. So we continue excavation around Fatimid Cairo, and in 2007 I opened new excavations on the northeast corner of the Fatimid city called Burj al-Jafar from 2007 to 2016. And you can see on the map the site of Burj al-Jafar is quite large and big, and with the two walls. And again, what it was interesting on this excavation is in fact to demonstrate that we had, of course, the wall of Salah ad-Din in black here, in limestone, but from the end of the 12th century. But inside and Comoros, what we found is a Fatimid wall made of mud brick and still preserved, preserved under a lot of layers, Mamluk layers of rubbish. And this Fatimid wall was well preserved, as you can see, for example, on this picture. On one side, you have the Ayyubid wall made of stone, And on the other side, in Intramuros, we found the Fatimid wall from Badr al-Jamali, made of mud brick. So it was interesting to open all these excavations to demonstrate, that our pattern, and our proposal was valid, because most of the time the archaeologists, what they do, they propose some theory, hypothesis, but they don't have enough elements, to demonstrate or to prove that they are correct. The strength of these excavations, in fact, is the duration of this excavation. We excavated for 16 years, so it's quite a lot, and on many sites, different sites. So all these excavations support each other and support our theories. And we were surprised in 2011 to find another wall, the third wall, not inside the second Fatimid wall, but in between, as you can see in green here. We found a wall not made of limestone, not made of mud brick, but a wall made of tapia, or rammed earth piecing. And it was very interesting because this technique is not well known in Egypt, especially for this Fatimid period or early medieval Middle Age. And also, it is most of the time a technique connected to North Africa or Al-Andalus or Spain. And you can see here on these pictures very clearly even the mark, the traces of the beams, to support the rammed earth, the tapia. And it was very interesting because it was also the oldest structure on the site. So we propose that this wall was the first Fatimid wall built by Jawar al-Sikili. But it was a little bit a problem for us, because why this wall was in between the two other walls, the wall built by Salah ad-Din and the second Fatimid wall? Because in all the models proposed by historians, the walls, the Fatimid walls and the walls of Cairo have been built, as a concentric model, with the first wall, top wall, then another wall outside, and then a third wall outside. So, the problem of the archaeologists, we are always bringing some new evidence, but sometimes the evidence can support history, like with the plague cemetery. But sometimes material evidence, can deny or can contradict historical proposals. And so we did other excavations to the northern part of the Fatimid wall, and we excavated a site just beside the very famous Bab el-Nasr, as you can see here in red. And it was a very interesting site because we found 3 walls. We found a wall that you can see here in brown made of limestone and also made of mud brick, the wall of Badr al-Jamali from the end of the 11th century. So 1087 to 1092. But we found also a wall in front of this second Fatimid wall. And this wall, it was a bit disturbing for us because this wall was not made of rammed earth. This wall was also made of limestone. You see, again, archaeology sometimes can be a bit problematic. So here you have what I identify as the wall, the first Fatimid wall of Jawar. And then Badr al-Jamali built another wall, thicker, at the back of the first Fatimid wall. And what is interesting here is that this Fatimid wall, I didn't describe the structure of the Fatimid wall, but in fact, the 2 Fatimid walls that we excavated were protected by square towers or buttresses. And here, I don't know if you can see on the photography, but we have a semicircular tower. And it's extremely interesting because the wall stopped at this tower. And our proposal, it's in fact here we found the first Fatimid gate of Bab el-Nasr. And this Fatimid gate of Bab el-Nasr was protected by 2 semicircular towers, a little bit for those who know Fatimid Cairo, like Bab el-Futu or Bab Zuela. So it was interesting to see that we found also some evidence of one of the very first Fatimid gates in Cairo. And of course, to make sure that our date, and our proposal was correct, we did the last excavation in between the 2 sites. So basically, on the northern side of Cairo, between Bab el-Nasr and Bourg al-Zafar, on the site called as Al-Mashtal. And unfortunately, our excavation stopped in 2016, mainly for bureaucratic and corruption problems that my colleague, Egyptian colleagues, know very well here. People didn't want archaeologists to continue excavations in Cairo, in Islamic or Fatimid Cairo. Here you can see the two walls. On the foreground you can see the wall made of ram earth and in yellow, and the other one built later, the second Fatimid wall made of mud bricks. So what is interesting now is to go from the site, from the data that we collected, to the reconstruction, reconstruction of Fatimid Cairo. And here you can see the location of the first Bab el-Futu and Bab el-Nas. One Bab el-Futu, the location with some data and publication, my colleague Shenol, but also I think about Ayman Fouad Said. So we have data from the primary sources, and we have also data from the archaeology and from the excavation. And here is a model that I was able to reconstruct, linked to the excavation. So here you have the four major discoveries that we did, the discovery of the Fatimid walls, and most importantly, we gave new information about the limit of the Fatimid city, because before our excavations, scholars were thinking that the Fatimid Cairo was smaller than it was in fact. We did a complete study of the Ayyubid wall, and we did a complete study of the urbanism of the Mamluk city, and a complete study of the material culture from the Fatimid to the Ottoman period. Here I will show you a 3-minute video that my colleague here, Zira Ladji, did, and I am working with the IS on a project that I hope that we will continue to go from the archaeology and the primary sources to a 3D model and a reconstruction of Fatimid Cairo. So just 3 minutes. See clearly the streets, because we are working not only on the fortifications but of course on the whole urbanizations of Cairo, with all the way to go in and out of the city. Now our project with Zera, I hope that we will be more ambitious, and instead of focusing only on in Oslo, we will probably, we will also work on the whole Fatimid Cairo, from the beginning of the Fatimid period until the end and the arrival of Salah ad-Din. And of course, my colleague Professor Aga Khan University and other colleagues will be involved in this project, because it's not only about architecture, but we hope to put people, and objects, to do a really nice 3D models of the Fatimid Cairo. Okay. So, three major points, very important points in all my projects, not only in Cairo, but in all East Africa. Archaeologists, they have a problem. Most of the time they dig and they leave. So they dig and they let the site, open. Some of them backfill, sometimes they cover their mess. But most of the time they just leave like that, and then when you come back the year after, you can see some, dead goats, in the pits and everything. This is not very nice, of course. So what we do, most of the time, what I did, in my project is to work with partners, international partners. In Cairo, I was extremely lucky to work with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. So it was also about conservation of the site and display and presentation to the public with a site management. We work with local community in Dar el Ahmar, and also it was about training and learning, as my director Stephane mentioned. Here you can see the work of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture to protect the Fatimid wall, mud brick wall. Here you can see this was done by people from the French Institute. All the ceramics that we found from different periods, from the Fatimid to the Ayyubid and Mamluk period, restored. We found a lot of objects, thousands and thousands of objects during 16 years, from Mamluk manuscript and Mamluk coin to Fatimid dinars, Fatimid dolls and keys, a lot of objects. I think we can even, it was a discussion that we had in the past with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture to open a site museum, at the Al-Azhar Park. And one day, maybe, I hope that we can do that. And here you can see all the work of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in Cairo. For the people. We work with the people and for the local community. And of course, the field school. The field school, as Leif mentioned, with more than 100 students, Egyptian students, trained. You can see Dr. Riyab El-Saidi, for example, was with us. Here you can see this young man here, very slim and young man, Walid Akef, who is here now tonight. You have also the former director of the Islamic Art Museum, Dr. Ahmed Al-Shawki. So I'm really, really proud that we train a new generation of Egyptian researchers. Here's a team, because in archaeology you don't dig by yourself. You have to dig with workers and experts and specialists. Of course, from the small picture to the big picture, let's say from the side to the big picture, we developed some research program at the French Institute based mainly on the excavations in Cairo. So I launched with my colleague, Dr. Abes Zouache from CNRS in Lyon, from 2008 to 2016, so I finished recently, a project on the war in the medieval Middle East. And we organized two conferences, international conference, one in Damascus, was published a few years ago, and one in Cairo will be published soon, next month or in January. They always say to me, Bukra, inshallah, but it will be published, I'm absolutely sure. Recently, my colleague Julie Monchamp published all the ceramics that we found in Excavations. So it's a book, I'm sorry, it's a book in French, but all the Fatimid ceramics, from the glaze production to the unglazed production, all these Fatimid ceramics are in this book. And more recently, I organized in Ankara a workshop during the work mess about Irfan architecture in Muslim cultures. And after the lecture, we will have a refreshment and have a colleague Tididos from Brill, and we will have a book launch, So I just wanted to mention this book because this book, in fact, is directly connected to the discoveries that we did during the excavations with the Fatimid wall, mud brick wall, and round earth. And so I wanted to develop, a discussion around Irfan architecture in Muslim culture to see what the people they were doing, in other culture, in other area, from the Spain, from Al-Andalus until Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So I try to be very fast because I just opened the second part of my discussion. Yes, because most of the time archaeologists are specialized, in one period, one site, one area. I think that it's a bit boring. I like, as my director Leif Stenberg mentioned, I like to travel. So here I will bring you to the sun, not the sun of Egypt, but to the Indian Ocean. It was my main topic. It was my topic for my PhD, in fact. When I did my PhD in 2001, and even before, I started to work on the Swahili coast in the Indian Ocean in 1993, when I did my MA on the Swahili. Why to work on the Swahili coast on the Indian Ocean? Because most of the specialists, they always focus on the same thing. Egypt, Middle East, Al-Andalus, Spain, and people forget a little bit what they call sometimes, I don't like this, but I have to use it to explain, peripheral Islam. So the Islam from the outside a little bit. But me, I consider this Islam not as the Islam from the outside, sorry, but the Islam from the inside. Because most of the time people describe Muslim cultures around the Mediterranean Sea. And they link Muslim cultures always to the late antiquity and the Byzantine period. I think it's a bit boring. I think it was overdone. And I think it's more interesting to think about Muslim cultures around the Indian Ocean. Because then you can connect Muslim cultures with other pre-Islamic cultures, like for example in Iran with the Sasanian, but also with India, with Southeast Asia, and of course with Sub-Saharan Africa. So I work on the Swahili coast. What we call the Swahili coast is the coast from Mogadiscio to in Somalia to Mozambique and Madagascar. And I focus, my first excavation were in 1999-2003 in Kenya. I worked on one of the main sites in Kenya, and one of the first things that we did was to do a new map, a new plan of the site. Because before excavation, only one part of the site was known and excavated by British archaeologist James Kirkman in the 50s. And this part was a part open to the public. So what we did, we took our, this is the Indian Ocean side, our machete, and we cut the jungle and everything, and we went through the forest to create a new map, of the site. Here you can see the areas that you can visit. So this site of Gedi is located, for those who know a little bit East Africa, very close to Malindi, in between Malindi and Mombasa. So this part of the site, this is a part of the site that you cannot see normally because it's surrounded by trees and bushes. And it was very interesting as an archaeologist because most of the time when you want to find something, you have to dig. It's underground. But here you just have to cut the trees, to a little bit. It's very interesting. And we did a new map of the ruined city of Gedi from the 11th to the 16th century. And our major discovery in Gedi was, in fact, to find a mosque, a great mosque, outside the walls. Because before excavation, all the people, they were thinking that the site had only one great mosque in the middle of the site. But in fact, we identified another great mosque outside the walls. So we did some excavations, first to prove that it was a mosque. It was a mosque. We found the foundation, the pillars. We found the mihrab, the niche around Mecca. And more importantly, this mosque we date this mosque from the 14th century. So much older than the main settlement was dated from the 15th century. And during our excavation, here you can see a proposal reconstruction of the mosque. And during our excavation, we found another mosque under this 14th century mosque. We found a mosque from the 13th century, only the foundations, in the floor. The mosque was surrounded by graves from the 13th century. So we found a succession of mosques from the 14th century up to the 11th century. So you can see in our excavation, under the mosque of the 13th century, we found the mosque of the 11th century. And it is very interesting because you have this kind of pattern only on one or two sites, at least for Kenya. Mark Autumn did an excavation in the north of Kenya, in the Lamu archipelago, in Shamgar, and he found also a succession of mosques. And so the mosque that we found in Gedi, 11th century, is one of the oldest mosques in Kenya, and so one of the oldest mosques in East Africa. Here you have something very boring, except for archaeologists, a stratigraphy, a section, with all the layers. And what is very interesting is that in these layers you can pick up some materials, some ceramics and objects, and it's with these ceramics and objects that you can date the layers, Of course, from time to time you can use also radiocarbon dating, C14, but the objects, not only the coins, but the ceramic, are very important to date some layers. And here you have the proposal, because in fact, from the excavations, you try to propose some discussion and also a new history of the site. And you can see here that in fact what we did, we found the old settlement of Gedi was located to the north. Then during the 15th century, the site moved to the south, west, with a stone wall, fortification. And then after the arrival of the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean, so after the beginning of the 16th century, the site was almost abandoned and started to reduce in size with a very simple stone wall. And then after the 16th century, it was the end of the site. So unfortunately for you, we published a book, but the book is in French. Sorry for that. Now, since I joined the Institute in 2012, I started to publish, and I started to publish in English, and I realized that people, they started to read me, because before, when you publish in French, the people, they don't read you. It's another problem. But, so in 2004, the French embassy in Dar es Salaam called me, and they told me, okay, you did some excavation in Kenya, it's nice, but why not working in Tanzania? I said, why not, but which site do you propose to me? And they offered to me to work on the site of Kilwa, which is one of the main sites in East Africa, a historical site known by primary sources and chronicle. And so this site of Kilwa is a very famous site in East Africa and very well known for all the people who know a little bit about the Swahili coast, but also the history of sub-Saharan Africa. So we moved to Kilwa. This project was supported not only by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but this project was supported by the French Embassy as an important project with the UNESCO and also with the Japanese Embassy. And the idea was to develop the tourism around Kilwa, because the south of Tanzania was not very developed. You know, all the tourism is to the north with the park and also in Zanzibar. And so the idea was to use heritage and architecture and historical site to attract tourists and to attract people, and also to protect this site, because the site of Kilwa was listed by the UNESCO, but was listed as a heritage in danger. And the idea was to protect this site. Here you can see a Portuguese map drawing of Kilwa. But I didn't want to work on the main site of Kilwa Kisiwani. Why? Because the previous year, when I was in Kenya, I dug a site was already excavated by an archaeologist. And I wanted, you know, the archaeologists, we also like new things, you know. I wanted to have my own site, you know, like a kid, you know, I want my site. And so I said to my colleagues that as the site of Kilwa Kisiwani was excavated by the former director of the British Institute, David Chittick, in the 60s, and the site was published in the 70s, I didn't want to do excavation in Kilwa Kisiwani, and I was looking for another site described in the Kilwa Chronicle, the site of Shag. And Shag was a site, was in competition with Kilwa Kisiwani between the 10th and the 12th century. So in fact, I tried with the archaeology to find an historical site. It's, of course, you will see it's extremely dangerous, and I don't recommend you that. But so I started to work on the main site of the Kilwa Bay, Songo Mnara, in 2004, because as it was the biggest site after Kilwa Kisiwani, I was convinced that Songo Mnara was the so-called enemy of Kilwa and the competitor of Kilwa between the 10th and the 12th century. This is why my director, Leifenberg, hates me. Okay, you can see on the pictures, of course, it looks extremely nice. It's not so nice. We have, of course, lobster and the red snapper. But you cannot see also the mosquitoes, you know, and sometimes it can be very difficult, and we don't have even water, you know, we have to bring water on this island. So the life is not as easy that you can see on the photograph. We did the excavations on the site of Songo Mnara. Here you can see the palace. All my photographs are before the conservation project, because the whole site of Songo Mnara and the site of Kilwa Kisiwani have been restored by the World Monument Fund and the UNESCO, and my colleague architect Pierre Blanchard. And here you can see the plan of Songo Mnara, of the palace, with a central courtyard that you can see here. These pictures have been taken before the restoration project. So now the site, I won't say that the site is spotless, but the site is clean. Here you can see all excavations around the stone house. The stone house of the Waungwana, or the elite of the Swahili society. And because what you have to understand that when I show you some pictures of stone house, this stone house belonged to the elite of the Swahili society. The rest of the Swahili society, they were living in mud and thatch houses. So it's like an iceberg a little bit. What you can see in archaeology, it's only the part which is preserved, you know. And of course, the stone houses are very well preserved. So I was working, and I'm still working on the architecture of the elite, you know, the palace and the stone house. Here you can see one of these stone house with a monumental entrance. And here you can see the map of the site that we did in 2005. And it's a bit my trademark, you know, each time that I work on a Swahili site in East Africa, the first thing that I do, I work with a big team of surveyors, and we are doing maps, plan of the site. This plan was reused by colleagues, you know, in UK and America and US, but sometimes they forget to mention that the origin of the plan, of the map, that we did this map. So one day I will have to claim my copyright probably for this map. Songo Mnara, and then I was a bit disappointed by Songo Mnara. Why? Because this site is from the 15th century. When we dug, immediately we found the beach immediately, so the pure natural white sand. So it was not the site described in the Kilwa Chronicle, the site of Shag from the 10th to the 12th century. So we moved to another site called Sanje in the middle of the Kilwa Bay, and this time we were more lucky. First point, you can see that this site even looked a little bit bad compared to the other site. You cannot even see architecture, you know, or remains, you know, from the outside. So basically, to have access to the monuments, you have to dig. And we were rewarded because we excavated the town wall, the Great Mosque, and one house on the wall. And all the archaeological material that we found was from the 11th to the 12th century. So here we have a big trading post protected by a fortification from the 11th to the 12th century, most probably also some archaeological material from the 10th century. And for me, what it was very interesting is to excavate a 12th century house made of beautiful coral stone with beautiful floor made of lime. And it's very interesting because there is a debate, not a debate, a discussion among the archaeologists, and Mark Horton was one of the first to propose an evolution of the Swahili house, you know. So basically the Swahili started with mud and thatch house, and you know, a kind of Darwinist evolutionarist model. And with my excavation, I propose something different, because you can see that during the 12th century, the Swahili, they had already very nice coral stone house. So the reality is much more complicated than what it was described previously. And you can see also the plan of this Swahili house from the 12th century with some 3 parallel narrow rooms, you know, are very similar to the ones that I show you in Gedi for the 15th century. And even in Lamu or Zanzibar, for the ground floor, some rooms like that are organized a little bit, and Dr. Fautopin is organized a little bit the same. So it's interesting to see that you can trace back the Swahili house, stone house, at least to the 12th century. So I have to go back to Kilwa Kisiwani, the main historical site. Here you can see the work done by my colleague, the restoration, the conservation project on the Great Mosque. The Great Mosque of Kilwa Kisiwani, the biggest mosque built to the south of the Sahara, in sub-Saharan Africa, for the medieval period. Here some conservation work on the small mosque and the pool of the palace. And here you can see the main palace called Usuni Kubwa, the Great Castle, from the 14th to the 15th century. And here I have a 3-minute video. 3-minute video.
Using his specialty, building archaeology, Stephane embarked on a detailed study of the city's major monuments, starting with the most majestic among them, called the Palace.
Here we're in the middle of Usuni Kubwa in Kiswahili. It means the Great Castle. There were great courtyards and rooms for the administration, but also relaxation areas.
Thanks to their patient work, Stephane and his team were able to restore the palace in a virtual model. This is the most spectacular monument of all the cities of the coast. For scientists, there's no doubt this was a seat of power, and it will inform them about the origin of Kilwa's founders. In the north, facing the ocean, they discovered the palace consisted of a residential area with many rooms arranged around interior courtyards. The height of refinement, this luxurious octagonal pool and its incredible view of the bay, which allowed the inhabitants to enjoy the cool sea breezes. In the southern part, in the largest area of the palace, archaeologists unearthed a huge square surrounded by cells. Stephane understands that this new element will be decisive for his investigation.
We studied the large yard you see here extensively. It's a kind of enclosure surrounded by cells. From our architectural studies, comparing the structures here to other structures around the Indian Ocean, we determined that it was a storage area for goods, which is called a caravanserai.
So there was a big square to accumulate goods, and from there they were put away.
That's right, they were stored in jars. So they had storage rooms for gold and storage rooms for a very precious commodity I discovered, rock crystal, which came from Madagascar. It was one of the most highly demanded products in the Muslim world.
How did they use it?
They made vases and precious objects for the court of the Fatimid caliphs and the court of the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad.
It's a caravanserai for luxury goods.
Yes, for luxury goods.
We're at a kind of hub for international trade.
Exactly. People came to Africa, to Kilwa, for all these high-value products.
So you see, I was not expecting to find some Fatimid things, in East Africa. So some people can call that fate, I don't know. So this brings us to the last part of my presentation, the excavation that I did in the Comoros Island. So here you can see on a map the location of Kilwa, connected to the gold trade, gold route to Sofala, so with the gold mine of Great Zimbabwe, or Moenemotapa, or Monomotapa for Jean de La Fontaine. And then here you can see the other route going to the Comoros. Comoros archipelago is composed of 4 islands, 3 are independent, and don't ask me why one is still, Mayotte is still French. It was extremely useful for me because I got some money from the French Cultural Affairs, So we did some excavations, but the first thing that we did when we worked in Mayotte was to do a map of the site. The site of Dembeni was excavated before us, but was never excavated by archaeologists. It was what we call in French érudits locaux, people living in Mayotte who wanted to dig a little bit during the weekend. But they published something. During our excavations and during our survey, I was really shocked to see the ceramics that we found on the site, because immediately on the ground we found the oldest ceramics that normally I was used to find, in the lower layers, the oldest layer. So we found some Abbasid ceramics, lustrate ware, sgraffiato, Persian hatchet sgraffiato, and also so-called Sassanido Islamic ware, or that I prefer to call turquoise Abbasid ceramic. We found a lot of very early Chinese material. From now, I got an email from my colleague Bing Zhao from the CNRS in Paris. She told me most of the Chinese ceramic are from the 11th to the 12th century. We are very little about the 10th century. And most importantly, during our excavations in Mayotte, we found rock crystal. And when you teach, and we have here Professor Aga Khan University, who is a specialist of Fatimid rock crystal. When you teach Islamic art and you start to find rock crystal, then you start to think a little bit what we have here. Why we have so many Islamic or Chinese ceramics from the 10th to the 11th century? Well, to me, there was no doubt that in fact this was a site for the trade, a kind of trading platform between the Middle East, between first the Abbasid, so Iran and Iraq, and also later with the Fatimid Caliphate. And we know, because I remember when you look at Anna's publication, on the Fatimid art at the VNA, you mentioned, Anna, precisely the fact that Madagascar might be a source for the Fatimid rock crystal. So for me, it was absolutely amazing to find during the excavation rock crystal. And I was not expecting to find rock crystal because you don't have rock crystal in Mayotte, in the Comoros. The rock crystal is from Madagascar. And so it was extremely interesting for us to connect, Madagascar to the Abbasid Caliphate and later to the Fatimid Caliphate. Because the Muslims who came, to East Africa so far as the Comoros Island came for a particular reason. And this time it was not the gold trade, but it was the rock crystal trade. It's also the reason why we found during excavation in Dembeni a lot of ceramics. Because people, they were trading, these ceramics, this Chinese ceramics, this Persian ceramics, against rock crystal. And most probably for the archaeologists, we have to be honest, what we have, it's only the physical remains, the ceramics. But more probably people, they were trading also silk, probably cloths from India, Gujarat, we found a lot of glass beads, So most probably more things. But unfortunately, these things are not visible to the eyes of the archaeologists. A new project very quickly. We started the project with the World Monument Fund in Tanzania again. I came back from Tanzania. I was there in last August, last summer. We started to work again with my dear colleague Pierre Blanchard and the World Monument Fund. So Pierre is in charge of the conservation. We want to list the site of Kua. It's a small site. It's quite a big site, sorry, in Mafia. And we want to list this site on the World Heritage List of the UNESCO. Mortimer Wheeler, who was a very famous archaeologist, described the site of Kua as the Pompeii of Africa. He might have exaggerated a little bit. I was not as impressed as when you visit Kilwa or Gedi, but it's a very impressive site anyway. I continue what I did before to train new generation of local researcher. Here you can see some Tanzanian and also one Comoran student. And of course, we live in the past, but we use also, and I can see Sarah's colleague, we also use technology. And so we started to work, we signed an MOU with Cape Town University and Professor Heinz Ruther. And my colleagues, South African colleagues, they started to do a 3D scan of the site and also to do a GIS using drones. And you can see, I just received a few weeks ago, all the 3D models of the mosque. So these 3D models are extremely impressive because then you can have maps, you can have sections, you can have whatever you want to publish and to study the site. Here you can see some what I call family photo, in Africa and from different periods with different teams. And as an epilogue, as a conclusion, last year in 2017, I worked with the UNESCO and I started a project in the Maldives. So even Professor Leifstenberg was crazy. He told me East Africa, and now you work also in the Maldives. It's even more exotic. And so we started the project with the UNESCO. Why? Because we want to support the Maldivian government who wants to list their coral stone mosque on the World Heritage List. And they didn't have any archaeological studies of this mosque. So my colleague, architect Moruf Jamel, published a very nice book and very good book about the coral stone mosque from an architectural point of view. And now what we want to do is to have archaeological data about this mosque. So we did some excavations in Fenfushi and Urumedu, and to see a little bit the link between this mosque and the pre-Islamic cultures, the Buddhist culture in the Maldives. And here you can see this mosque, and you can see that they are very much inspired by the Buddhist temples that you can see, for example, in Sri Lanka. Test pit. Very good also for archaeologists, because when you dig in the Maldives are so flat that you reach immediately the water table. So you don't need to dig a long time, 5-10 minutes, and it's finished. And from the small to the big picture, we organized with my colleague, Dr. Farouk Topan, an international conference last September about the Muslim cultures of the Indian Ocean. And we are working also with the Aga Khan University. We are starting a project with the Catholic University of Portugal. You can see in the atrium an exhibition that we did about the architecture of the Indian Ocean. So we are trying to do a lot of things around the Muslim cultures of the Indian Ocean. And okay, I lost my conclusion, but I think I will remember. Yes, what I hope what I managed to do tonight is to demonstrate how archaeology can bring new data and new knowledge about Islamic architecture, and maybe more broadly, new knowledge about Muslim cultures and history. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Stephane. We move on in the program, and it is a great pleasure to welcome and introduce Professor Aga Khan Pradines. Professor Aga Khan Pradines graduated in Arabic and Islamic art at the Oriental Institute of Delhi's University with a thesis on miniature painting of the Mamluk period. She also has great interest in music and has received a diploma in piano as a soloist from the Conservatorio Benedetto Marcello in Venice. Subsequently, she completed a doctorate in Islamic art at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS of London University. That was a thesis on early Arab and Persian miniature painting. She was then appointed Baring Foundation Research Fellow in Islamic Studies at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where she was based in the research department. She conducted research on a range of objects drawn from the splendid Islamic collection of the museum, but concentrated on the Fatimid material, on which she then wrote a book and published in 1998. From 1997 from 1994 to 1997, she was in Ireland as a lecturer in Islamic art at Trinity College, Dublin, and curator of the Islamic collection of the Chester Beatty Library. Aga Khan Pradines is now a professor in the history of Islamic art and at SOAS, and I warmly welcome her to give her comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. And thank you very much, Stephane, for your wonderful lecture that has taken us on a journey, on a very, very long journey, marvelous journey. So, I'm bringing you all back now. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at this inaugural lecture, both because it involves a significant development in a sister institution, and especially because it recognizes the achievements of a major scholar. Having studied with a dear friend and colleague in Paris, Marianne Barrocand, sorely missed, Stephane Pradines has established himself as a significant figure through especially his major contribution to the archaeology of the Islamic Middle East and East Africa, as we've seen, some of it conducted under the auspices of the prestigious French Institute of Archaeology in Cairo. His Cairo excavations have illuminated aspects of military architecture before and during the Crusades, Fatimid and Ayyubid periods, uncovering the Fatimid walls, as we've seen, and he has also excavated the town walls during the Fatimid period. Thus, importantly, I think has to be stressed, showing the extent of urbanization. As we all know, the university sector here, and especially its provision for the humanities, is coming under increasing strain. Courses are curtailed, posts are lost. Accordingly, we salute the Aga Khan University for the continuing support it is showing for the arts, and in conferring on Stephane Pradines, showing professorship, showing an understanding of its potential for future development. It is also, incidentally, a rare delight to find at this rather difficult time a French colleague showing us a vote of confidence by accepting an appointment in Great Britain. In particular, the development that this appointment promotes concerns a vision that transcends the lines of demarcation between the now rather well upholstered and comfortable specialization of painting, material culture, and architecture. In doing so, it points towards a more holistic approach, one that integrates artifacts in various media within a human framework of production, commerce, functionality, and aesthetics. It is one that also embraces cooperation. Stephane has, for example, been involved in a large international research program on war in the medieval Middle East, one that also encourages students to produce related essays and dissertations, as well as giving a forum to colleagues to publish articles and books and to organize conferences. And we've seen this very well during the lecture. There is also an important outreach aspect. Stephane will doubtless continue to be active in projects that encourage sustainable development. For example, the cultural project in Bab al-Ahmar in Cairo, supported by the Aga Khan Trust. He's always been aware that excavations should benefit local populations and scholars, has consequently helped develop major field schools of Islamic archaeology, and I think that is something that we need to highlight, how important this is to develop a field school, to have a teaching element to the excavations and to the archaeology, and therefore has trained hundreds of local researchers in Egypt and in East Africa. The organizational and diplomatic talents this required have also manifested themselves in his work with and for organizations such as UNESCO, the World Monument Fund, and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture to protect archaeological sites and developed conservation programs that protect Muslim heritage. To mention just the most recent, since 2017, he has collaborated with UNESCO and the Maldivian government to study and protect the coral mosques of the Maldives and to add them to the World Heritage List. So we've seen this, and it's now added to the World Heritage List. In these respects, Stephane is a pioneer. His grasp, both in time and space, is impressively large. To have conducted extensive excavation in Egypt is highly significant, but hardly unusual. What is exceptional is for this to be one part of a wider vision and a wider theatre of activities that encompasses not just the Near East, but also East Africa, and virtually the whole of the Indian Ocean. By uncovering especially the archaeological footprints of settlement, trade, and associated human exchanges, he has been able to transcend the view of East Africa as somehow separate or marginal and restore it to its rightful place as an integral part of the wider Islamic world. This is an exciting area that he has made very much his own, and we have high expectations for the results of his future research. I have found particularly exciting, because of the parallels with my own research, his archaeological finds relating to the extraction of rock crystal around Madagascar, and his tracing of the complex trade routes whereby it was distributed to various centers, not just one, for the production of objects, including luxury objects. This is just one of the areas in which there might be opportunities for future collaboration, both as individuals and as representatives of two important London centres for the study of Islamic art and material culture. The support shown for Islamic art at the Aga Khan University makes it a significant contributor that has the potential not merely to extend coverage of the field in London, but also through joint projects, whether in research or teaching, to strengthen and help integrate it further afield. On a more personal level, given our common interests, I very much hope that Stephane and I will be able to work together to bring significant joint research plans to fruition. In the first place, ones that we have already discussed and started to develop, and that stems from our parallel researches into rock crystal, particularly Fatimid ones. The aim would be to analyze more deeply its sourcing, distribution, and economics, to study more comprehensively the range of artifacts made from it, their techniques of manufacture with collaboration of colleagues that we have already contacted, and beyond that, to explore more fully the aesthetic charge associated with the symbolic light-bearing potential within Islamic and particularly Ismaili culture of this most magical of translucent materials, something that I have started already to investigate, but needs a lot more research. I should be delighted if we could cooperate in this and other ways in future, but above all, I wish now simply to welcome Stephane to this parallel professorship in the certain knowledge that as a distinguished teacher, researcher and colleague, he will continue, whatever he chooses to concentrate on, to make a significant contributions to the field. His appointment is well deserved, and I congratulate him and wish him every success in future.
Okay, I take the opportunity to thank Professor Pradines, and it of course warms the heart of a director to hear that you are thinking about collaboration. That's very good to hear. I'm also, as I've been mentioned a couple of times, the directors, I will take an executive decision that I'm not going to permit any questions. I think this is a celebration and a ceremony, so it's not an ordinary letter in that sense. So I think it's much better that we walk out, and if you would like to speak to Stephane, please do during the time we share a piece of food and drink, and that will be fine. But before closing this, I also think it's my pleasure to welcome you at the university as a full professor, and I also would like to repeat the thanks you gave to everyone involved. I don't dare to try to repeat the names. I will say I just thank everyone involved for organizing this event. Thank you very much, and you are all welcome outside. Thank you.